morning, good evening. This is Professor Gilberto Sarfati. Today we have Hillel Fuld. Let me hear his bio. Hillel is dubbed Israel top market. Hillel works with leading tech entrepreneurs, investors, and visionaries to accompany them on their journey from idea to revenue. Hillel work is published on some of the world's top tech publications, including TechCrunch, VentureBeat, Entrepreneur, The Next Web, Business Insider, and more, bringing Israel energetic tech scene to life. He collaborates with leading global brands, including Google, Oracle, Microsoft, and Nike. Hillel, thank you very much for accepting the invitation from Stand With Us. Well, what is your curriculum? I mean, what do you do after all? You all over Israeli tech scene. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with Israeli technology scene.
Sure. So first of all, I appreciate the invitation. I'm a big fan of Stand With Us. I've been in touch with the team here, and I think you guys do incredible work. So thank you for that. As far as what I do, I like to say that I wear four hats, four different hats that summarizes all the things that I do. The first thing is I work with startups. So startups, reach out to me, whether they read my writing or they, see my videos and they ask for help. And I'm always happy to help entrepreneurs. If it's a company that I can connect to the press or to an investor, happy to do so. And then about 2% of the companies that I work with, I actually make money from. Companies that I've helped over the years, and they come back and say, let's work together. So that's kind of the first thing, is just startups. Second thing is content. So I write as a journalist, basically on every leading tech publication, from TechCrunch and The Next Web, VentureBeat, Inc., Entrepreneur, etc. I do daily video blogs on Israeli tech, and I do a podcast. So the second thing is content. The third thing is just public speaking, a lot of public speaking. And then the fourth thing is I work with a lot of multinational corporations, as you mentioned, like Google and Microsoft and others. And in addition to that, I have a course on entrepreneurship, and I do a lot of kind of loose ends, but that's basically the main things that I'm doing.
Great. Since when has it been involved with this ecosystem in Israel?
About 12, 13 years.
12, 13 years. So what has been changing along this period? Because, everybody talks a lot about the book of Dan Sender about the Startup Nation, and everybody's still talking the Startup Nation, but, the book was in 2009. So probably a lot of changes since 2009. So tell us a little bit about what has changed since 2009. I know it's a lot of time, but let's just update on that.
Yeah, I think someone has to write a new book, Scale Up Nation, because Startup Nation was, Israel was very well known for building startups, and unfortunately we would sell those companies too early. Waze is a perfect example. If Waze had not sold to Google then, they'd be worth probably 10 or 20 times what they were worth then. But traditionally, Israeli companies sold too early, and that's not the case anymore. In fact, as we were preparing for this webinar, I saw that a company in Israel called Melio, M-E-L-I-O, just raised $250 million at a $4 billion valuation. We're seeing so many companies at multi-billion-dollar valuations. We're seeing so many IPOs. We're seeing so many monster rounds. And so I think a lot has changed in that we're no longer building startups to just sell them. We're building large, sustainable businesses. And in addition to that, another thing that I think is interesting is that traditionally Israel was very strong at cyber, because of the military and other things. Today, Israel's pretty strong at every sector. There's no such thing as a sector of technology that Israel is not strong in. So I think that that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So how I believe that that moving from startups to going more for scale-ups that have IPOs and so on, what happened in the ecosystem to move from startups to scale-ups? Why they decided not to sell anymore the companies, and more entrepreneurs move to different directions in terms of strategy?
I just think that the ecosystem matured. I just think we became more mature. We're seeing much, much more money flowing into Israel from all the investors across Silicon Valley, across New York, across Asia. And so more capital is flowing in. I think it's higher quality capital as well. And so Israeli entrepreneurs are stepping up and just trying to build, businesses and not just startups.
Yeah, indeed. But I was checking one of the so-called ranks about unicorn. It mentions about 700 unicorns. I guess there are much more in the world than these 700 unicorns. I see some of Brazilian companies that is not in the risk rank. But anyway, let's say that we have about 700 unicorn companies in the world. And about 60 of these companies have been founded by Israelis, both in Israel or outside of Israel, which is pretty much interesting also. But how do we just explain this phenomenon? I mean, almost 10% of all unicorns in the world are founded by Israelis. So how such a small country can generate that amount of entrepreneurs able, really to take the company to this size?
I mean, that's a great question. I think that's a question that, many books and a lot of literature has been written about. Obviously, Startup Nation, the book, is one of them. I don't think that there's one answer or one explanation. There's a lot of components here. It starts with, the culture. I think Israeli culture is really unique in that way. For better or for worse, Israelis, don't let anyone stop them. And that's from a cultural perspective. From a government perspective, obviously the Israeli government is very encouraging to entrepreneurs. We have the innovation authority that, grants startups a lot of money, not for equity. So there's that. There's obviously the military, right? A lot of these entrepreneurs come from 8200, the intelligence unit in the army, where they're taught, how to solve problems. So, there's a lot of reasons for it. But to me, if you'd ask me if I had to choose one reason, I think that historically, our nation, the Jewish people, always had to survive, right? We were always in survival mode. And now we're home. Now we don't have to survive. We're here. And so we're taking that energy and we're repurposing it to change the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really, you have a lot of books like besides the Startup Nation, Chutzpah, exactly the expression of telling your mind and doing what you have to do as one of the key words that a lot of people mentioned. But one of the recent moves that I found really interesting, as I mentioned, that some Israelis are actually opening the companies in the United States, or actually moving the headquarters to the United States. So how actually you see this movement that actually the headquarter or the entrepreneur is not beginning the company in Israel and actually moving the company to United States? How Israel is benefiting, for example, of this move?
So I once heard the previous CEO of Waze talk about this, and he said, had he not moved the sales and marketing to the US, he would not have succeeded. But had he not kept the R&D in Israel, he also wouldn't have succeeded. And so a lot of times companies, build the research and development centers in Israel, and then they go and they build their sales and marketing force in the US, which, makes a lot of sense. Obviously, there's a tiny little country. You can't build a company, on 5 million potential customers, 9 million potential customers. So, I think it makes sense. I'm not familiar with companies that have no connection to Israel. I mean, if they're founded by Israelis, they usually have some presence here. There are some examples of companies that are completely based in America, but I think that that's the exception to the rule.
Yeah. So what you basically say is that the competitive advantage of Israel is, of course, in the brains connected to technology. So the world is the market, but the brain is really in Israel. But Exactly. This comes from me that is the most important question for today. I was checking that different sources say that the Israel high-tech companies are facing a shortage of skilled labor between 12,000 and 20,000 professionals. Because of you also talking about companies, huge companies like you advise that also have RDs centers in Israel. So some people, and I would say that I would include myself, have a concern that Israel has faced actually, let's say, the top, because now the border is exactly the ability to have more engineers, more high-tech people. How do you see this question of the shortage of labor, skilled labor in Israel, and how do you see that people are discussing on how to face this huge challenge, right?
Yeah, it's a challenge. There's no question about it. I don't think there's any magic solution here. I think that the army produces new talent all the time, and I think that the fact that startups in Israel are so ingrained in the culture, and everybody promotes and glorifies technology so much, and so the younger generation also wants to build startups. And I think that that's we're going to see a lot of new talent, kind of the next generation. But the question still stands. It is definitely a challenge. I don't think it's just a challenge in Israel, by the way. It's a challenge in many places. There's never enough talent out there. And so, we just got to make sure that we keep the talent here and not let them run away. But other than that, we just got to, do our best with what we have.
Yeah, but there's for example, a few years ago, I remember that I've been asked for people in Israel, if you have people that are engineers, how can present and maybe send people to Israel. So actually, it's that there's maybe the possibility of, there's a recent change in law that allows in terms of visa people to go to work in Israel. But there is a long-term question, actually, what is in society terms means that have more people coming to Israel, and how they going to integrate, and how Israel is going to be integrated, let's say, in the larger society, and at the same time keep the Jewish identity. If you have more high-tech people that maybe going to make a long-term live in Israel without having this Jewish identity. So of course, I'm taking this question of economics together with questions of identity, the identity of the country, and I don't know what is probably this direction on this mix-up of facing the challenge of shortages of labor.
I mean, yeah, I still think there's no, I don't have any magic solutions. I don't have any kind of, great answers here. I think that's something we struggle with. I guess that's where my faith comes in. I believe it's all going to work out. We're home, we're in Israel, and it's going to work out. I don't, from a demographics perspective, obviously there is room for concern, both in terms of the Arab population as well as, the population from other countries that might be coming to Israel to work. But, I guess my only answer to that is I have faith that it'll all work out, but I know that's not a very satisfactory answer. I don't think there is one.
No, that's perfectly fine. I mean, as a researcher, a professor, I have to, of course, to bring the questions that are forward and not about the questions about the past. And of course, our audience would like actually to have intelligence opinion. And of course, your opinion is pretty much important about the ecosystems you are really living in every day, the challenges, of course. I have seen that you interviewed a lot of CEOs recently. So you talk about the people in Israel, and of course, these CEOs, I guess they have this concern about this the shortage of the skilled labor in Israel. But maybe it's also the idea, if you are engineers, any country, come and work in Israel. Go do Aliyah, because there is opportunity, there's a market. But again, as a role of the also of academic and let's say the other side, let's say the dark side of this high growth of high tech, is that in one sense Israel has been historically a society of not a lot of inequality. I can't even compare in Brazil, that is a huge inequality, right? But of course, if a lot of people getting more rich that are involved in the high tech, but there's a part of society that is not in part of high tech. And one of the things that I see that is, really scary is amazing how the prices of real estates are increasing in Israel. And of course, because there is demand on that, but how to integrate, how Israel is facing really the challenge of people that are not part of high-tech industry, not part of the big buzz, to also be part of this growth in the Israeli economy.
Yeah, so I think you're not going to ever want to have me back as a guest, because I keep saying there's no good answers. But there's no, that's a problem. It's definitely a problem. There's still a massive gap between, the technology sector in Israel and the mainstream kind of population. Obviously, the technology sector in Israel constitutes a large percentage of the GDP of the country, and we definitely, the tech world contributes a ton to Israel on all fronts. But it's definitely, there's still an economic gap, a significant economic gap. And, I think it's something that we're working on. I think, there's a lot of organizations that are working hard to bring, ultra Orthodox into the world of technology, and the Arabs into the world of technology. So there are people trying to solve it, but it is a problem. But you can't, your next question can't ask me about diversity, because that's also a problem.
No, again, going back to communication, and I know that is really your specialty here. Because I was just remembering that I read about one of the maybe posts that you had, that you actually say, well, in my career, but you also, if I don't recall correctly, you also you had a BA at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, right?
No, Bar Ilan. Okay. But it was not exactly in the field of technology, and you are involved in technology. And so from what I recall in your history, you get involved in that because you had the feeling that you are able to do communication, in which Israelis, as you mentioned, were not very good on that. Can you further elaborate this? I mean, why you saying that they are not that good, and how they're improving actually on that, on also in these 12 years that you have been involved on getting, to publish more about Israeli companies and their influence. I mean, yes,
in terms of the brands and communication.
I think we're very good at that, actually. I mean, listen, everybody knows in the technology world, everybody knows about Israel's strength in the tech world. And, I'm seeing tons and tons of press, positive press, about all the technology and innovation coming out of Israel. So on that front, I think, generally speaking, we're okay. Obviously, Israelis, specifically those that might not be fluent English speakers, have a challenge when it comes to communication, but that's how I make a living.
So go on, tell a little bit about exactly about how do you make this living exactly? I mean, how do you improve this communication?
Right. Yeah, that's what I do for a living. I think, I'll tell you, a lot of times, I always say that the difference between sales and marketing is subtlety, the ability to say something in a subtle way, right? When you're selling to someone, they know you're selling, they know that they're being sold to. But when you're marketing to someone, if you're a good marketer, they don't even know that they're being marketed to, right? And so you have to be subtle. You have to tell a story. The Israelis aren't very good at that. And in fact, the word subtlety doesn't exist in Hebrew. There's no such word. So it is a challenge for Israelis, for sure.
Yeah. And let me talk about a bit something that is that I especially care about. That is, of course, the challenge that BDS pose on this boycotting. And actually how more the Israeli companies involved in actually branding the image of how companies, Israeli company, I would say because of course I'm also Israeli, I feel part of that anyway, living in Brazil. But how we can better brand the positive side actually of Israel impacting the world economics. Because I mean, you see the rage against Israel, for example, recently in the case of Bini and Jerry's, is huge. But when it comes to Afghanistan, nothing. I still hear nothing about that. So I see there is a lot of work actually still to post this positive image size and to face the challenge that BDS on boycotting actually Israel economic sense. How do you feel about this question? How can we really better show what Israel is doing and also actually discrimination in the negative side of that?
Right. So first of all, you have to start with the premise that we're never going to get rid of anti-Semitism, right? They're always going to find an excuse to hate us. That's first of all. Second of all, the right way, in my opinion, to battle BDS and everything, all the other people that hate Israel, is twofold. First of all, keep doing good, keep building amazing companies, keep making the world a better place, and keep sticking to the truth. At the end of the day, they can lie and they can call, 6 terrorists who escaped from prison. They can call them, freedom fighters. They call them whatever they want. They're terrorists. And so as long as we stick to the truth, and by the way, even when the truth isn't good, if we make a mistake or something, stick to the truth. So that's the only thing we can do, is keep doing good and keep sticking to the truth. And, it will change some opinions, and other opinions are not open to be changed. And there's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah. That's something actually that I personally admire about also Stand With Us, is exactly to finding, it's not just a traditional house bara with many, Israel is a great country, but it's exactly to tell what is the truth. But this is really hard, that you have in a social network really this cacophony of fake news, and is really a challenge but you are especially is really on also in social networks. So what is you would be advised also in terms of Israeli companies to get on it, but about this facing the fake news? How do you respond to fake news?
I don't. Listen, if someone is going to lie, then I can't debate that person, right? How am I supposed to debate a person if they're not sticking to the truth? So I think, fake news is a massive problem. It's a massive problem in general, and very, very much specifically when it comes to Israel. But I fundamentally believe that the truth prevails at the end of the day. And so, again, if someone says, the words Palestinian state, so then you can ask them a simple question. When was the Palestinian state founded? Who was the president? What was the currency? What was the language? What was the culture? What was the national anthem? Tell me some information about this Palestinian state that you keep talking about. Listen, at the end of the day, you can't fabricate things that did not exist. You can try, but people are smarter than that. And so, yes, some people will believe the lies, but, those that are looking for the truth, they'll understand that what our biggest enemies are saying are just blatant, violent and poisonous lies about Israel.
Great. So let's keep working together to spread the truth. But let's go back to a question of technology. So I took one report from the Israeli Innovation Authority. In this report, it claimed that Israel has a leading position in artificial intelligence due to the ability of Israeli entrepreneurs to identify its potential in early stage and enter quickly in the market. And I was wondering how and why these Israeli entrepreneurs are able to do what Israeli authorities claim. I mean, why they are able to identify the potential of, in this case, artificial intelligence technology, and to enter quickly in the market. I mean, there's two statements here. That is to see something before other countries, and to also act before other countries.
Well, I mean, I'll answer the second question first. The ability to act, much like, when you're talking about companies, obviously smaller companies can act faster than larger companies, right? A startup can move faster than Microsoft because they're small. Same is true for our country, right? Israel's small, we can move fast, right? So that's as far as, moving. As far as identifying, I think that comes back to the military. I think, in the military in 8200 and many of these other units, the IDF is using bleeding edge technology, both to defend Israeli citizens and to minimize civilian death, civilian deaths by our enemies. And so we have access and we're exposed to these bleeding edge technologies very early on. And that's, I guess, how we identify it as a trend that's kind of up and coming. And, AI is a perfect example. AI, is no longer a sector of technology. AI is in everything. Everything we do is AI, right? And so, Israel's definitely leading the way when it comes to artificial intelligence, in healthcare or in basically any sector, AI plays a significant role.
Yeah. One case, I don't know if you feel comfortable to comment, that I would like to know more about is Lemonade, because I mean, in just 1 year, it became this huge company in the United States. I mean, it came almost out of the blue. This is what can you comment on that if you know more about this case?
Sure. Yeah. So I know Lemonade very well. I'm very close with the founders, both Daniel and Shai. And Shai Winiger, who, by the way, was the founder of Fiverr before Lemonade, he and I sat down about a month before Lemonade launched publicly, and he showed me the app. And I'm telling you, I knew right away this company is going to be big, because if you think about the insurance industry, it's very, very old, antiquated, it's very primitive. And if you could build an amazing product that actually benefits consumers as opposed to the insurance company, the sky is the limit. And so what I think is most interesting about Lemonade is that if you look at all of the top companies in any, vertical of technology, they all did the same thing. Uber used technology to change transportation. Airbnb used technology to change hospitality. Facebook used technology to change communication. And Lemonade used technology to change insurance. And so, you could put them right alongside all those big guys who took a very old industry and disrupted it using technology. And, there's many, many elements to Lemonade's success. There's obviously the product, which is amazing. They're the founders and the team, which are incredible people. And there's a massive audience, a massive market that's just begging to be disrupted. And so, just to give kind of one little tiny detail, not that I'm an insurance expert by any means, but insurance companies have no interest in giving, their customers money, right? If someone files a claim, the insurance company's kind of goal is to not pay them, right? Because there's a conflict of interest, because if I'm giving you money, then I'm losing money. Lemonade got rid of that conflict of interest. And so they pay, there was a story of someone that I don't know, their leather jacket got stolen, and they filed a claim, and they had money in their account in like 45 seconds, right? So Lemonade, they are not built to try to prevent their customers from being paid. They're built to pay their customers. And that's just one tiny example of why they're so unique.
Yeah, what I find also extremely bold is that actually, as you mentioned, that this industry is, in the United States, is super traditional. And that comes Israelis and go to disrupt in the United States. This is not a minor thing. I mean, how they, really coming from outside and disrupting from inside out, actually, this industry. How bold is that? How can you explain? I mean, this how audacious is actually to disrupt this traditional industry, which is not in the country, is actually going to outside and is starting from that. What do you think that moved that, since you know them very well?
No, I mean, listen, Shai Winiger, like I said, he founded Fiverr before, which is massively successful. Daniel Schreiber, the CEO of Lemonade, also, he's had an incredible career. And they don't want to build small things. They want to build huge things. And Lemonade is, again, it's targeting the biggest market out there. So
great. This is one point that I would like to learn a little bit more, because most of startups, what we call our born globals, they are selling to the entire world. And in the examples that we're talking is this huge mentality, the world is the market. But in the other hand, in Brazil, we have also unicorns, but they are extremely locally oriented, these startups. And even huge companies are oriented to Brazilian market. And I say the Brazilian perspective, that the highest challenge is to develop a global mindset mentality in the entrepreneurs in Brazil, especially in the marketing, of course, in marketing globally. Since it's also your specialty, and you have this old relationship that is this mindset of really selling to the entire world. What would be your advice to develop this global mindset mentality on marketing for Brazilian entrepreneurs actually to look to the world and not only Brazil?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I mean, not Brazil specifically, but in general, I don't see any reason to build a company that's local, to target a local economy or local market. I just think that's, silly. Why? The internet is a global mechanism, a global infrastructure. And so, you could be sitting in your basement in Brazil building, a website that's targeting global audiences. And so, I just think the answer is social networks. The answer is the internet. The answer is, you have these platforms, they're here for you to use. And so I just think, I think people have to think bigger, right? Don't just think about building companies, locally. Think bigger.
Yeah. Because usually what we heard here in Brazil is that the Brazilian market is huge, so that's why they usually target. So the advantage of Israel was being such a small that also pushed to look at it for the entire world, but that became a so strong trend that everybody is looking for the entire world. And to develop this mentality that you're not developing a product for a single country, and also to market to the entire world is a huge challenge, particularly to Brazil, and see all the potential. How to enter this other market? What would be the connections to get in the United States, for example? And you also do this kind of, of work among the countries, because as you also and U.S. American. So how do you see of this challenge of entering the U.S. market? What are your advice, for example, if a Brazilian startup would like to enter the U.S. market, what would be your first basic advice on that?
First advice would be research. Right? You figure out who your competitors are in the US. Are you different than them in any way? Are you the same? That's first of all. Figure out if there's demand before you go to the US. Is there demand? If the answer is yes, then you could hire a local team, maybe even one person who's, has a good Rolodex, good network in the US, and, have them start building your presence in the US, even if it's from a marketing perspective, just to plant seeds over there. Right? But I don't see any value in creating a local company that only targets the local market. To me, that's just missing, you're just missing the jackpot here.
Yeah, great advice. We're going towards the end of our talk, and we'd like now to move to the future. So what is your opinion? In your opinion, how different will be the Israeli tech landscape in 5 years? Let's say, what are the trends? What coming? What are you going to see in the next 5 years in terms of technology trends?
In Israel specifically?
Yes.
I think that I hope we're going to see a company the size, the likes of Google and Facebook and Microsoft or any of these guys started and built by Israeli founders, right? Because, we're talking about scale up nation. We're talking about, $4 billion companies here and $5 billion, and that's great. But we haven't yet built a Google or a Facebook. We haven't yet built $1 trillion company. And so, that should be our ambition. And I hope that happens soon.
That's interesting. And what your bet? I mean, the company is already there. So what is going to be your top 3 candidates for this company size?
You're asking about what the company will do?
No, which company? What is it?
Oh, I don't even know. I don't even know if it started yet. I mean, there are so many, but listen, there's a lot of problems in the world that still have to be solved. I think, if you look at all the big tech companies, Apple and Google and Facebook, they're all building glasses. They're all building augmented reality glasses, right? Because the way we interact with computers today is still the same way we interacted all these years ago with a mouse. Why do we use a mouse? It's crazy, right? And even a phone, even a smartphone, you're still walking around the street with this big piece of glass in your face, right? It's still primitive. And so if we can build glasses that will enable me to interact with computers in a more intuitive, frictionless way, that's huge. And I know that that's going to happen. The question is who will build it. Maybe an Israeli company will build it. Drones are just getting started. There's amazing technology in the drones world. And so maybe an Israeli company will build something that will totally change the world of drones. There are so many possibilities. I don't know if the company that will hopefully reach that kind of, $1 trillion mark has even started yet. Maybe it hasn't even been started yet. I don't know.
So, but what do you think is going to be the hot in terms of technology over the next 5 years? Because, for example, in this report that I read from the Israeli tech authority, there are mentioned this position in artificial intelligence. But what, in your opinion, is going to be hot in terms of technologies over the next 5 years?
Healthcare. I think, yeah, medicine in general is still very, very primitive. Specifically, by the way, mental health. I think that, you know, if you look at mental health today, it's super primitive, right? I'll just give you one example. If someone, let's say, is depressed or anxious, they go to a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist gives them medicine and says to them, come back in 8 weeks and let's see if it worked. Like, what is that? What do you mean, let's see if it worked? What am I, guinea pig, right? So personalized medicine is something that will, in my opinion, completely change in the next 5 to 10 years. There's no more like try something and see if it works. It's going to be personalized based on AI, artificial intelligence, based on machine learning. And, you know, I think using technology, medicine and healthcare will become a lot more effective.
Okay, that's really great. That's really great. That's really great that it goes towards the end of our talk. Hillel, would like to first thank you very much for your time and sharing your experience. Would like to say final words for Brazil about Israeli scenario?
Come to Israel. It's beautiful here.
Great. We're looking forward after the end of this pandemics. Man, I really miss to travel to Israel. Well, thank you very much, Hillel. Thank you for having to be with us, stand with us. And Shana Tova, Mar Chatima Tova.
You too. Thank you for having me. Bye.